In a fit of anguish, Grayson Whitmore shattered the framed portrait of his lost sister Charlotte, the glass splintering like his heart within the silent halls of Whitmore Manor. George's cotton baron, rich but desolate in 1868, ruled a world where love was a forgotten language, until Isabella Clark, a mere maid, crossed his threshold, her gaze defying the chains of class. Her presence was a scandal, her courage a spark in his shadowed empire. Could a woman of no rank awaken a soul that had forsaken hope? Or would the manor's silence consume them both? In the tender embrace of dawn, Whitmore Manor stood resolute against the Georgia sky, its white columns rising like sentinels over the endless fields of Baldwin County. The year was 1868, and though the Civil War had faded into memory 3 years prior, its shadows lingered in the scarred earth and the hearts of those who tilled it. The manor, with its marble floors and wide porches, was a monument to a world that had not wholly perished, yet it bore the weight of silence. A silence as heavy as the dew that clung to the cotton blooms. Within its walls, time seemed to pause, held captive by the will of its sole master, Grayson Whitmore. At 32, Grayson was a man forged in discipline, his tall frame clad in the austere black of mourning that had never left him. His eyes, the color of a storm gathering over the horizon, surveyed the world with a cold precision. He was the last of the Whitmore line, heir to a fortune built on cotton and ambition, yet his wealth brought no warmth to the halls of his home. Each morning, he rose before the sun, his boots echoing on the polished floors as he moved through rooms that had not known laughter in years. The servants, few and silent, bowed their heads as he passed, for Grayson Whitmore was not a man who invited familiarity. This morning, as the first light gilded the fields, he stood on the balcony overlooking his domain. The cotton stretched before him, a sea of green and white, each bloom a testament to his unyielding control. Yet beneath his rigid exterior, a memory stirred. A girl's voice, soft and fleeting, playing a melody on the piano that now gathered dust in the parlor. Charlotte, his sister, gone these many years, lost to the fever that had swept through during the war's cruelest days. He pushed the thought away, his jaw tightening. There was work to be done. Descending to his study, he met his clerk with a nod. "Double the overseer's pay if the shipment is ready by Friday," he said, his voice low and final. "If not, he's gone." The clerk scribbled the order, and Grayson turned to the window, where the rising sun promised another day of solitude. The gravel road to Whitmore Manor stretched long and unbending beneath the Georgia sun, its edges fringed with wild grasses that swayed in the morning breeze. Isabella Clark, 25 and slight of frame, sat perched on the edge of a creaking cart, her worn boots dangling above the dust. Her dress, patched but clean, clung to her form, and her dark hair, caught in a simple braid, gleamed with a quiet defiance. In her hands she clutched a canvas satchel, its weight a reminder of the life she carried, years of labor, sacrifice, and a promise that anchored her heart. The manor loomed ahead, its white columns stark against the green expanse of cotton fields, a palace of wealth that seemed to repel the warmth of the day. Isabella's eyes, bright with a fire tempered by hardship, traced the outline of the house. She had known toil since childhood, her hands shaped by the loom and the hearth, her soul by the weight of her mother's illness. The war had been a cruel thief, stealing their savings and her mother's strength, leaving Isabella to fight for both their lives. Even now, in a small cottage miles away, her mother lay frail, her breaths a fragile thread. "Mama," Isabella whispered, her voice softer than the wind. "I hope I'm doing right by you." The words were a prayer, a vow to earn enough to settle the doctor's bills and bring her mother peace. The cart halted before the manor's grand steps, and Isabella descended, her boots crunching against the gravel. The air carried the scent of earth and cotton, but the house itself seemed to exhale silence, its windows dark and unyielding. Miss Adeline, the housekeeper, awaited her at the threshold, her gray hair pinned tightly, her spectacles glinting with authority. Her voice, sharp as a winter gust, cut through the stillness. "You're the new maid, Isabella Clark. Your job is to clean, nothing more, nothing less. Speak only when spoken to and stay out of the master's way. Mr. Whitmore, don't take kindly to strangers sniffing about his business." Isabella met the older woman's gaze, her back straight, her expression calm but resolute. "Yes, ma'am," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the apprehension that stirred within. Miss Adeline handed her a pail and a bundle of rags, her eyes narrowing as if measuring the girl's mettle. Without another word, she led Isabella through the double doors, which closed behind them with a thud that echoed like a vault ceiling shut. The grand hall unfolded before her, its marble floor gleaming under chandeliers that hung like frozen stars. Yet the beauty was cold, the silence oppressive, as if the house itself mourned a joy long lost. Isabella took her first step, the pail heavy in her hand, her heart heavier still. She did not yet know the man who ruled this place, nor the grief that bound him. But as she crossed the threshold, she carried with her a spark, a warmth that no silence could extinguish, a light that would soon challenge the shadows of Whitmore Manor. The grand hall of Whitmore Manor lay hushed, its marble expanse reflecting the faint glow of midday light that slipped through tall windows. Isabella Clarke knelt at its center, her gloved hands moving in steady rhythm, the cloth in her grip gliding across the stone with a care that bordered on reverence. She worked alone, the silence of the house wrapping around her like a cloak, broken only by the soft scrape of her efforts and the distant cry of a hawk beyond the fields. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, to the promise that had brought her here, but she held them at bay, focusing on the task before her. The manor might be cold, but she would not let it break her. The heavy oak doors swung open without warning, admitting a gust of damp air and the sharp sound of boots against stone. Isabella did not hear the intrusion, her focus tethered to the floor, until a shadow fell across her work. The air shifted, heavy with a presence that commanded the very space it occupied. Startled, she jerked upright, the cloth nearly slipping from her hand, and found herself staring into the storm-gray eyes of Grayson Whitmore. "Who are you?" His voice was low, sharp as a blade, cutting through the stillness with an authority that demanded answer. He stood tall, his dark coat slick with rain, his broad shoulders framed by the doorway. His gaze was not cruel, but it was unyielding, assessing her as one might a stranger trespassing on sacred ground. Isabella's breath caught, but she steadied herself, rising to her feet with a grace that belied the pounding of her heart. "I, Isabella, sir," she said, her voice soft but clear, unshaken by his tone. "The new maid," Miss Adeline said. "I don't care what she said." He cut her off, his eyes narrowing, though they lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. A flicker passed through them, something quick, like lightning across a darkened sky, gone before it could be named. His jaw tightened, and he added, "Colder now. Don't let me find you kneeling in the middle of my hall again." With that, he turned, his boots clicking against the polished stone, and vanished into the next room, leaving the air colder than before. Isabella stood rooted, the cloth still in her hand, her chest rising and falling beneath the worn fabric of her dress. Her cheeks flushed, not with shame, but with a defiance she dared not voice. She would not crumble under his scorn. Bending once more, she resumed her work, the cloth moving with renewed purpose. Above, the clouds rolled in low, growling waves. Below, the silence returned, but it was no longer unbroken. Something had stirred in the heart of Whitmore Manor, though neither yet knew its name. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the study of Whitmore Manor, where Grayson Whitmore sat behind his mahogany desk, his pen scratching across ledgers with the precision of a soldier's march. The room, lined with leather-bound books and portraits of stern ancestors, exhaled the same silence that governed the house, a silence broken only by the sudden rap of knuckles against the door. Before Grayson could respond, the door swung open, admitting Nathaniel Caldwell, whose presence filled the space like a burst of summer wind. "Nate," Grayson greeted, his voice cool, his eyes barely lifting from the page. At 34, Nate was a study in contrast to his old friend. Where Grayson was rigid, Nate was fluid, his tailored coat and easy smile proclaiming a man unburdened by the war's lingering ghosts. His family's cotton wealth rivaled the Whitmores, but Nate wore his fortune lightly, as if it were a jest he alone understood. "Grayson, you old hermit," Nate said, dropping into a chair with a theatrical sigh. "This place is a tomb. Do you ever tire of playing king in your silent kingdom?" He leaned forward, his hazel eyes glinting with mischief. "Come to town tomorrow. There's a deal to be made, and I won't have you brooding while the world turns." Grayson's jaw tightened, but before he could reply, a soft knock heralded Isabella's entrance. She carried a silver tray with a teapot, her steps measured, her gaze lowered but not submissive. The light caught her braid, lending it a quiet sheen, and for a moment the room seemed to pause. Nate's smile widened, predatory yet playful. "Well now," he said, rising with a flourish. "Who is this jewel hidden in your mausoleum, Grayson? A maid with the grace of a debutante. Isabella set the tray down, her expression composed but her eyes sharp. "I clean floors better than I curtsy, sir," she said, her voice low, laced with a defiance that made Nate chuckle and Grayson's pen still. "Spirited, too," Nate clapped his hands. "Grayson, you must play matchmaker. Let me steal her for a dance at the harvest fair." His tone was teasing, but the words carried a careless cruelty, as if Isabella were a trinket to be won. Grayson's gaze lifted, cold and unyielding. "She works here, Nate," he said, each word deliberate. "Not for your amusement." The air grew taut, and Nate raised his hands in mock surrender, laughing. "Always so serious," he said, but his eyes lingered on Isabella as she left, the door closing softly behind her. Grayson returned to his ledger, but his hand gripped the pen too tightly, a storm brewing beneath his calm. In the hall, Isabella walked on, her heart steady, unaware of the seed she had unwittingly planted. The days at Whitmore Manor unfolded with the rhythm of a clock wound too tightly, each hour marked by the silent labor of those who served its master. Isabella Clark moved through the grand house like a whisper, her presence soft but undeniable, her hands weaving warmth into spaces long accustomed to neglect. She rose before dawn, when the Georgia sky was still bruised with night, and set about her tasks with a diligence that spoke of both duty and defiance. The marble floors gleamed beneath her cloth, the stair rails bore no trace of dust, and in the vases by the grand staircase, she replaced wilting blooms with wildflowers plucked from the manor's untended gardens. Their faint perfume lingered, a quiet rebellion against the house's austerity. In the parlor, where a grand piano stood shrouded in shadow, Isabella paused one morning, her fingers brushing the velvet cover. She lifted it just an inch, revealing keys untouched for years, their ivory dulled by time. She did not play, such boldness was not hers to claim, but she hummed a soft melody, a lullaby her mother had sung in better days. The sound, though faint, seemed to stir the air, as if the house itself leaned closer to listen. She closed the cover quickly, glancing over her shoulder, but the hall remained empty, its silence unbroken save for the echo of her own heart. Her thoughts turned, as they often did, to her mother, lying frail in a cottage miles away. The war had stolen much, their savings, their peace, but it had not taken Isabella's resolve. She worked for the wages that would pay the doctor's bills, for the hope that her mother might one day rise again. "I'll make you proud, Mama," she murmured, folding linens with hands that trembled only slightly. The words were her anchor, grounding her against the weight of the manor's cold grandeur. Miss Adeline, ever watchful, observed Isabella's work with a hawk's scrutiny. "You're thorough, girl," she said one afternoon, her spectacles glinting as she adjusted them. "But don't go dreaming in this house. Mr. Whitmore don't take to change, and he don't take to dreamers." Her voice was stern, but her eyes held a flicker of something softer, as if she saw in Isabella a strength she could not dismiss. Isabella nodded, her expression serene but unyielding. "I'm here to work, ma'am," she said, her voice steady. Yet as she turned to scrub the next step, a spark burned within her, a determination to bring light to this place, not for its master, but for herself. The manor might be a fortress of silence, but Isabella Clark was no stranger to breaking through stone. Grayson Whitmore was a man accustomed to order, his days governed by routine as unyielding as the columns of his manor. Yet, in the quiet of early morning, as he descended the grand staircase of Whitmore Manor, he sensed a shift in the air, a disturbance so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by a lesser eye. The vase by the stairwell, long filled with brittle stems, now held wildflowers, their petals soft and vibrant against the marble. The linens on the rail, once haphazard, were folded with a precision that spoke of care. Even the faint scent of lavender, elusive as a memory, trailed through the halls, stirring something within him he could not name. He paused, his hand resting on the banister, his storm-gray eyes narrowing. These were not the work of Miss Adeline, whose efficiency lacked such warmth. No, this was the doing of the new maid, Isabella Clark, the girl with the steady gaze and the voice that had dared to answer his scorn. He should have been displeased, for change was an intrusion upon his carefully guarded world. Yet, as he stood in the silent hall, he found himself tracing the path of her presence, his mind conjuring the image of her kneeling in the foyer, her hands moving with quiet purpose. From the window he caught sight of her in the courtyard, her braid catching the dawn's light as she carried a basket of linens. She moved with a grace unmarred by the weight of her labor, And for a moment, Grayson's breath caught, held captive by a feeling he had long buried. A memory stirred. Charlotte, her laughter filling these halls, her fingers dancing across the piano keys in a melody that had once been the heartbeat of this house. But Charlotte was gone, and the music with her, leaving only silence and the guilt that gnawed at Grayson's soul. He turned abruptly, his boots clicking against the floor, as if to outpace the thought. The manor was his dominion, its silence his shield. Yet, as he entered his study, the faint perfume of lavender followed, a reminder that Isabella Clarke had breached his defenses, not with force, but with the quiet persistence of a flower blooming through stone. The study of Whitmore Manor was a sanctuary of shadows, its walls lined with books that had not been opened in years, their spines gathering dust like the memories they held. Isabella Clarke entered with caution, her pail and cloth in hand, sent by Miss Adeline to dust a room few dared disturb. The air was heavy with the scent of aged leather and ink, and the tall windows admitted only slivers of afternoon light, casting the desk in a pool of muted gold. She moved quietly, her steps a whisper against the polished floor, her heart alert to the sanctity of this place. It was not her place to linger, yet the room seemed to hold secrets, as if the very walls mourned a loss she could not name. As she trailed her cloth along the shelves, her eyes fell upon a letter, its edges worn, lying open on the desk as if forgotten. The handwriting was elegant, the ink faded, but one name stood out in looping script. Charlotte. Isabella froze, her breath catching. She had not meant to pry, her work was to clean, not to uncover, but the name drew her, a thread of sorrow woven into the paper. She glanced at the door, then back at the letter, her curiosity warring with her duty. In that fleeting moment she read no more than a line. "My dearest Charlotte, the music is silent without you," before guilt compelled her to turn away, her cloth resuming its task with haste. The door creaked, and Grayson Whitmore stood in the threshold, his presence a storm cloud rolling into the room. His eyes, gray and piercing, fixed upon her, and the air grew taut with unspoken accusation. "Do you make a habit of snooping, Miss Clarke?" His voice was low, each word a stone dropped into still water, rippling with barely restrained anger. Isabella straightened, her heart pounding but her gaze steady. "No, sir," she said, her voice quiet yet firm. "I was cleaning. I saw the letter. I didn't mean to pry." She held his stare, refusing to flinch, though the weight of his scrutiny pressed against her like a physical force. Grayson stepped closer, his shadow falling across the desk. "Then don't," he said, his tone colder now, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of something softer. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "You may dust my house, Miss Clarke, but my past is not among the items to be polished." The words were sharp, meant to wound, yet they hung between them, heavy with a grief he did not voice. Isabella nodded, her lips pressed tight. "Yes, sir," she said, gathering her pail and retreating to the door, but as she stepped into the hall, her heart carried the weight of that name, Charlotte, and the sorrow it held. Grayson remained by the desk, his hand brushing the letter, his eyes distant. Neither spoke, but in that moment a thread had been woven between them, fragile and unseen, binding their silences to a shared, unspoken wound. The door to the study closed with a soft thud, sealing Grayson Whitmore in the dim solitude of his sanctuary. The air was heavy, thick with a scent of old paper, and the echo of Isabella Clarke's retreating steps. He stood by the desk, his fingers brushing the worn edges of the letter that bore Charlotte's name, its ink a faded testament to a grief he had never permitted himself to voice. The words of the maid, her quiet defense, her steady gaze, lingered in his mind, an unwelcome intrusion upon the fortress of his silence. He should have dismissed her, banished her from this room and his thoughts, yet he remained tethered to the desk, to the letter, to a past that refused to rest. He lifted the paper, its weight far greater than its fragile form. "My dearest Charlotte, the music is silent without you." The words, written by his own hand years ago, cut as sharply now as they had then. Charlotte, his younger sister, had been the light of Whitmore Manor, her laughter a melody that danced through its halls, her fingers coaxing life from the piano now shrouded in dust. She had been but 19 when the fever took her, a casualty of the war's cruel aftermath, her body too frail to withstand the chaos that had engulfed their world. Grayson had stood by her bedside, helpless, his promises of protection crumbling as her breaths grew faint. He had failed her, and with her loss, the music had died, leaving only silence and a guilt that gnawed at his soul. He sank into the chair, the letter trembling in his hands. The memory of Charlotte's voice, soft and teasing, filled the room, a ghost that haunted him still. "You mustn't be so stern, Grayson," she had said once, her eyes bright with mischief. The world is not all ledgers and cotton, but the world had proven otherwise, and he had buried his heart with her, erecting walls of discipline to shield what remained. Whitmore Manor was his dominion, its silence his penance, and he had vowed never to let another breach its defenses. Yet Isabella Clarke had done so, not with force, but with wildflowers and folded linens, with a voice that met his scorn without flinching. Her presence was a challenge, a spark in the darkness he had chosen. Grayson set the letter down, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the window where dusk gathered over the fields. He would not yield, not to her, not to the memories she stirred. But as he rose, the faint scent of lavender clung to the air, a reminder that the walls he had built were not as impervious as he believed. The Georgia sky, so often a canvas of languid blue, turned traitor without warning, its horizon swallowed by clouds as dark as grief. The air grew thick, heavy with the promise of rain, and by late afternoon a storm descended upon Whitmore Manor with the fury of a vengeful god. Thunder cracked like cannon fire, shaking the manor's ancient beams, while rain lashed the tall windows, seeking entry through every seam. In the fields beyond, cotton blooms bowed under the deluge, and the workers, caught unprepared, fled for shelter, their shouts drowned by the wind's relentless howl. The house, so long a fortress of silence, now pulsed with the wild heartbeat of nature's wrath. In the drawing room, Isabella Clarke moved with quiet purpose, her hands steady as she lit sconces along the walls. The candles flickered, casting frail pools of light against the storm's encroaching gloom, their flames trembling with each gust that rattled the panes. She wore her usual dress, patched but neat, her braid a dark rope against her back, and though her eyes flicked to the windows with each flash of lightning, she did not falter. Storms were no strangers to her. In the lean years of her childhood, when war had stripped her world bare, she and her mother had huddled in their cottage, the roof leaking, the wind a thief at their door. Those nights had taught her to watch storms, not fear them, for they passed, as all things did. Yet this storm felt different, its ferocity matched by the manor's oppressive stillness. Isabella paused, a match still burning in her hand, and thought of her mother, whose frail form seemed ever at the mercy of life's tempests. "Hold on, Mama," she whispered. The words lost to the thunder, she struck another match, her movements deliberate, as if each flame were a small defiance against the chaos outside and the cold within. The drawing room, with its velvet drapes and unlit hearth, seemed to watch her, its grandeur a hollow echo of a life no longer lived. She recalled Miss Adeline's warning, "Stay out of the master's way," yet the manor's silence, broken now by the storm, felt less like obedience and more like surrender. Isabella straightened, her jaw set, and moved to the next sconce, her shadow dancing on the wall. She did not know that Grayson Whitmore, drawn by the storm's clamor, had entered the house, his coat dripping, his presence as unyielding as the tempest outside. Nor did she sense the weight of his gaze, hidden in the doorway's shadow, as he watched her work, her calm a stark contrast to the turmoil that churned within him. The storm raged on, but within the walls of Whitmore Manor, another force was gathering, one that neither thunder nor silence could contain. The drawing room of Whitmore Manor flickered with the uneasy light of candles, their flames bending to the will of the storm that raged beyond the walls. Isabella Clarke stood by a sconce, her hands steady as she adjusted a wick, her silhouette a quiet defiance against the chaos of rain and thunder. The storm's fury seemed to press against the manor, seeking to breach its silence, yet Isabella moved with a calm born of necessity, her thoughts tethered to the labor that anchored her. She did not hear the soft tread of boots, nor sense the shift in the air, until a voice, low and resonant, broke the stillness. "You're not afraid of thunder?" Grayson Whitmore stood by the unlit fireplace, half cloaked in shadow, his dark coat glistening with rain. His presence filled the room, not with force, but with a weight that commanded attention, his storm-gray eyes fixed upon her, with an intensity that stirred her pulse. He had entered silently, drawn by the storm's clamor or perhaps by something less tangible, and now he stood, arms loosely folded, a question lingering in his tone. Isabella turned, her breath catching, but her voice held steady. "Not of thunder, sir," she said, her eyes meeting his without faltering. She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, I fear silence, the kind that settles in a house where no one speaks unless they must. Her words hung between them, bold yet unguarded, a challenge wrapped in truth. Grayson's expression did not change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened, as if her words had struck a chord he wished to silence. Before he could respond, a gust of wind tore through the room, flinging open a tall window with a crash. Rain slashed inward, dousing the nearest candle and scattering papers from a side table. Isabella moved swiftly, her skirts brushing the floor as she reached the window, her hands grappling with the heavy frame. The wind fought her, relentless, but she pressed on, her strength born of years spent battling greater storms. Grayson was at her side in an instant, his hand finding hers on the latch, his grip firm and cold. Together they forced the window shut, the wood groaning under their combined effort. For a moment they stood there, pressed close by necessity, their breaths mingling in the damp air. Raindrops clung to Isabella's cheek, shimmering like tears she would not shed. And Grayson's eyes, so often cold, softened with a warmth he could not name. Their hands remained entwined on the latch, a touch that burned through the storm's chill, and their gazes locked, not in anger, but in a recognition that neither could voice. The thunder roared, but it was the silence between them that thundered louder, a pulse of something new and perilous. Grayson blinked, stepping back, his voice regaining its guarded edge. "Go to bed, Miss Clark," he said, though the words lacked their usual bite. Isabella nodded, her heart racing. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice clear as she took up her candle and left, its light casting shadows in her wake. Grayson remained, his hands still on the latch, as if holding fast to a truth he was not yet ready to face. The storm had retreated by dawn, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and the fields of Whitmore Manor glistening under a tentative sun. In the kitchen, where the hearth glowed with a modest fire, Isabella Clark knelt to arrange logs, her hands deft despite the morning's chill. The room, with its scrub tables and copper pots, was a rare haven of warmth in the manor's cold expanse, and Isabella worked with a quiet ease, her braids swaying as she moved. She hummed softly, a fragment of her mother's lullaby, the sound mingling with the crackle of flames. The door creaked, and Thomas, a young field hand with a broad smile and calloused hands, stepped in. A bundle of firewood balanced on his shoulder. "Morning, Miss Isabella," he said, his voice bright with the camaraderie of shared labor. "Thought you might need more to keep this fire going after that storm." He set the wood down, dusting his hands, and grinned. "You're making this old kitchen feel like a home." Isabella laughed, a sound as clear as a bell, her eyes sparkling with genuine warmth. "It's the fire's doing, Thomas, not mine," she said, rising to stack the logs. "But I'll take the kind words." Their exchange was brief, light, the easy banter of those who knew the weight of toil. Thomas tipped his cap, his grin lingering as he turned to leave. From the courtyard window, Grayson Whitmore watched, his tall frame half hidden by the frame, his storm-gray eyes narrowed. He had come to inspect the storm's damage, but his gaze was drawn to the kitchen, to Isabella's laughter, to the ease with which she spoke to Thomas. A pang, sharp and unfamiliar, twisted in his chest. Not anger, but something deeper, something he refused to name. She was a maid, nothing more, he told himself. Yet the sight of her smile, offered so freely to another, stirred a restlessness he could not quell. He turned away, his boots crunching against the gravel, his jaw set against the intrusion of such thoughts. The manor was his to command, its order his to maintain. Yet as he walked, the echo of Isabella's laughter followed, a melody that pierced the silence he had so carefully guarded, leaving him to wonder what it might mean to hear it again. The autumn sun hung low over Baldwin County, bathing the market square of Milledgeville in a golden haze that softened the scars of war still etched upon its streets. The harvest festival, a fleeting reprieve from toil, had drawn the townsfolk together, their voices weaving a tapestry of laughter and song. Wooden stalls lined the square, laden with jars of amber honey, baskets of cornbread, and quilts stitched with the patience of long winters. A fiddler's tune danced through the air, coaxing couples to the makeshift dance floor, while children darted between legs, chasing the glow of lanterns strung above. The war's shadow lingered in the lean faces and patched clothes, but for this one evening, hope loomed like the cotton fields beyond. Isabella Clark stood near a stall, her simple dress of faded blue brightened by the flush of her cheeks. Beside her, Sarah, her childhood friend, chattered brightly, her auburn curls bouncing as she gestured at a tray of apple tarts. "You work too hard, Isabella," Sarah teased, nudging her. "Let the manor rest for a night and dance with us," Isabella laughed, a sound as clear as the stream that ran through their old village, her eyes alight with a joy she rarely permitted herself. "I'm here for the tarts, not the twirling," she said, but her smile betrayed her delight in the crowd's warmth, a stark contrast to the manor's chill. From the edge of the square, Grayson Whitmore watched, his tall figure half hidden by the shadow of a sycamore. He had come to meet a buyer, his black coat and stern demeanor setting him apart from the revelry, yet his gaze drifted, unbidden, to Isabella. Her laughter cut through the din, a melody that stirred a pang in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. She was a maid, he reminded himself, a fleeting presence in his ordered world, yet the sight of her, free, unguarded, her braid catching the lantern light, held him captive. He gripped his cane, its silver head cool against his palm, and turned his eyes away, only to find them drawn back moments later. The crowd parted, and Nathaniel Caldwell strode into view, his silk waistcoat gleaming, his smile a beacon of calculated charm. "Miss Clark!" he called, his voice carrying over the music, drawing curious glances. He bowed with a flourish, his hazel eyes glinting with mischief. "A festival is no place for a beauty to stand idle. Will you honor me with a dance?" His tone was playful, but the words carried a condescension that prickled the air, as if Isabella were a prize to be claimed for sport. Isabella's smile faded, though her composure held. "I don't dance, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice steady, her eyes sharp with a dignity that silenced the murmurs around her. "I'm here to enjoy the evening, not to perform for it." Sarah stifled a laugh, but Nate's grin only widened, undeterred. "Come now, don't be coy," he pressed, stepping closer. "Grayson, tell her, a maid with such grace deserves a turn on the floor." He turned to Grayson, who had approached unnoticed, his presence a gathering storm. The crowd hushed, sensing the shift. Grayson's eyes met Isabella's, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. "Miss Clark has her own mind, Nate," he said, his voice low, each word a blade. "She owes you nothing, least of all a dance." The rebuke was quiet but final, and Nate raised his hands in mock surrender, laughing to mask the sting. "Always the protector, Grayson," he said, but his eyes lingered on Isabella, who nodded slightly, her gratitude veiled by pride. She turned back to Sarah, her laughter returning, softer now, as the music swelled. Grayson remained, his gaze fixed on her, the festival's warmth unable to thaw the storm within him. He had defended her, but the act had cost him, stirring a truth he could no longer deny. The memory of the festival clung to Grayson Whitmore like the scent of wood smoke, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold halls of Whitmore Manor. He had returned under a starless sky, his mind haunted by the image of Isabella Clark, her laughter ringing through the market square, her eyes bright with a freedom he could neither claim nor dismiss. Yet another image gnawed at him, sharper and more insidious, the kitchen scene days prior, where Isabella had laughed with Thomas, the field hand, their ease a blade against Grayson's tightly guarded heart. He had told himself it was nothing, a maid's kindness, a worker's jest, but the festival had stripped away his defenses, leaving only the raw truth of his unrest. In the dim light of morning, Grayson paced the manor's grand hall, his boots echoing against the marble, his thoughts a storm no less fierce than the one that had shaken the house nights before. The linens Isabella had folded lay neatly on the stair rail, their order a silent testament to her presence, and the faint scent of lavender lingered, a torment he could not escape. He should have been in the fields overseeing the harvest, but his steps led him to the corridor near the kitchen, where he knew she would be. Isabella appeared carrying a stack of linens, her face serene but her eyes alert, as if sensing the shift in the air. She paused at the sight of him, her arms tightening around the bundle, her braid catching the light that spilled through a window. Grayson's voice, when it came, was low, laced with a heat he could not contain. "It seems you've taken to socializing during work hours, Miss Clark," he said, his gaze piercing. "The field hand. Thomas. Is that where your attention lies now?" Isabella's eyes widened, a flash of surprise giving way to indignation. "Excuse me, sir?" she said, her voice steady, though a flush rose to her cheeks. "Thomas brought firewood. I thanked him. That's not socializing. It's decency." She stepped closer, her chin lifting, her words cutting through the silence. I haven't forgotten my place, Mr. Whitmore, but perhaps you've forgotten that kindness costs nothing. The air between them crackled, charged with a tension that went beyond words. Grayson's jaw clenched, his hands curling at his sides, not in anger but in the face of a truth he could not name. Her defiance, her strength, held him captive, and for a moment he saw not a maid but a woman whose fire rivaled his own. Yet pride held him fast. "It's familiarity," he said, his voice colder now. "This is my house, Miss Clark, not a village dance." Isabella's gaze did not waver. "And I work in it," she said, her tone unwavering. "But I am not your property, sir." With that, she turned, her steps measured, leaving Grayson alone in the hall. He stood rooted, the linens a silent witness to the storm within him, his heart pounding with a longing he dared not voice. The manor's silence returned, but it was no longer his ally. It was his judge. The twilight settled over Whitmore Manor like a velvet shroud, its halls cloaked in a silence that seemed to mock Grayson Whitmore's unrest. He stood in his study, a glass of bourbon untouched on the desk, the memory of his confrontation with Isabella Clark burning in his chest. Her words, "I am not your property," echoed, a rebuke that stirred both shame and a longing he could not name. The festival, the kitchen, her laughter with Thomas, all had conspired to unravel the order he had so fiercely guarded. He turned to the window, where the last light bled across the fields, when a familiar knock shattered his solitude. Nathaniel Caldwell strode in, his silk waistcoat catching the lamplight, a bottle of wine in hand and a grin that promised mischief. "Grayson, you look as dour as a winter storm," Nate said, settling into a chair with the ease of one who owned the room. "Still brooding over ledgers? Or is it that maid of yours keeping you awake?" His tone was light, but his eyes gleamed with the same careless cruelty that had marked his jests at the festival. Grayson's hand tightened around the glass, though he did not drink. "Mind your words, Nate," he said, his voice low, a warning wrapped in calm. But Nate, undeterred, leaned forward, his smile widening. "Come now, that Miss Clark, she's a firebrand, isn't she? Those eyes could ruin a man if he took her seriously. Lucky for me, I'm only in it for the sport." He laughed, the sound grating against the study's stillness. "You should have seen her at the festival, turning me down like I was a peddler. I'd wager she'd make a fine diversion, though." The air grew taut, the lamplight flickering as if sensing the storm within Grayson. He turned, his eyes cold as steel, and stepped closer to Nate. "She's not a diversion," he said, each word deliberate, cutting through the jest. "She's a woman, Nate, stronger than you or I, and she's not here for your amusement." His voice trembled with a fury he had not expected, a defense born not of duty but of something deeper, something that frightened him. Nate's laughter faltered, his brow rising in surprise. "What's this, Grayson? Playing knight for a maid?" He leaned back, his tone mocking. "Careful, old friend. A woman like that could cost you more than your pride." The words were meant to sting, but they only fueled Grayson's resolve. "She's worth more than your games," Grayson said, his voice steady now, though his heart raced. "Leave her be." The command hung between them, final and unyielding. Nate raised his hands in mock surrender, rising with a chuckle. "As you wish," he said, but his parting glance was sharp, a challenge unanswered. Alone again, Grayson sank into his chair, the bourbon still untouched. The letter from Charlotte lay on the desk, its presence a reminder of the walls he had built. Yet Isabella's face, her defiance, her fire, haunted him, a light he could no longer ignore. The manor's silence pressed against him, but for the first time it felt like a cage. The dusk settled over Whitmore Manor with a quiet that felt like surrender, its halls dim under the weight of an autumn evening. Isabella Clark moved through the corridor, a tray of folded linens in her arms, her steps soft but purposeful. The day had been long, marked by the echo of her confrontation with Grayson Whitmore, his accusation of familiarity still stinging like a wound unhealed. Yet she carried on, her heart anchored by the promise to her mother, her resolve a shield against the manor's cold. She had learned to bear its silence, to find strength in her labor. But the memory of Grayson's eyes, storm gray, fierce, yet fleetingly tender, haunted her, a riddle she could not solve. As she neared the study, voices drifted through the half-open door, low and urgent. She paused, not intending to listen, but the sharp tone of Jeremiah Tate, the rival planter, held her still. "Your delays weaken you, Whitmore," he said, his voice oily with ambition. "The town talks of your maid, too bold, too noticed. What is she to you, this Isabella Clark? The words were a taunt, laced with the malice of a man who thrived on others' ruin. Grayson's reply came, cold and clipped, each word a stone that struck Isabella's heart. She's a maid, Tate, nothing more. Her boldness is no concern of mine. The dismissal was final, a verdict that stripped away the moments they had shared, the window, the festival, the unspoken thread that had bound them. Isabella's breath caught, the tray trembling in her hands, but she did not cry. The pain was sharp, a betrayal not of love but of hope, the hope that she was more than a shadow in his world. She stepped back, her face pale but composed, her heart a storm of resolve and sorrow. The manor, with its marble and silence, was no place for her, not if its master saw her as nothing. She returned to her small room, its bare walls a mirror to her thoughts, and began to pack her canvas satchel. Her dresses, worn but neatly folded, joined the few possessions she owned, a locket from her mother, a book of poems, a life built on sacrifice. She moved with a quiet dignity, her hands steady despite the ache within. The decision was made, not in anger, but in the fierce pride that had carried her through war and want. Isabella paused, her fingers brushing the locket, her mother's face vivid in her mind. "I tried, Mama," she whispered, her voice steady. She would leave Whitmore Manor, not as a defeated servant, but as a woman who knew her worth. The night deepened outside, but within her a spark remained, unextinguished by the words that had sought to diminish her. The hour before dawn cloaked Whitmore Manor in a hush deeper than its usual silence, as if the house itself held its breath. Isabella Clark stood in the kitchen, her canvas satchel slung over her shoulder, her worn boots silent against the stone floor. The hearth's embers glowed faintly, casting a soft warmth that did little to ease the chill in her heart. She had worked her final night, scrubbing the last of the manor's endless surfaces, and now she prepared to leave, her resolve as unyielding as the columns that guarded this place. The words she had overheard, Grayson Whitmore's cold dismissal, "She's a maid, nothing more," had severed the fragile thread of hope she had dared to weave. On the table she placed her room key, its iron weight a symbol of her brief tenure. Beside it, she left a folded note, her handwriting careful and clear. "I was not made for silence, Mr. Whitmore. I hope someday you won't be either." The words were not born of anger but of truth, a parting gift to a man whose heart she had glimpsed but could not reach. She straightened, her gaze lingering on the kitchen, its pots and warmth a fleeting refuge in a house of shadows. As she stepped into the grand hall, the portrait of the Whitmore family loomed above the staircase, their faces stern, their eyes distant, a lineage bound by pride and isolation. Isabella paused, her heart heavy but unbowed. "This is not my place," she whispered, her voice a vow to herself. The manor's silence seemed to answer, cold and unyielding, but she turned away, her steps firm. Miss Adeline appeared on the porch as Isabella reached the gravel drive, her gray hair pinned tightly, her arms folded against the dawn's chill. "You sure about this, girl?" the housekeeper asked, her voice a mix of challenge and concern, her spectacles glinting in the faint light. Isabella did not falter, though her throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am," she said, her tone clear, her eyes steady. Miss Adeline's gaze softened, a rare crack in her stern facade. "He's a hard man," she said, almost to herself, "but he ain't heartless." Isabella's lips curved, a faint smile tinged with resolve. "No, ma'am, he just keeps it buried too deep for anyone to reach." With that, she turned, her boots crunching against the gravel, and walked down the long drive. The sky above was turning gold, the first rays of dawn touching the cotton fields, their blooms a promise of renewal she would not witness. She carried her satchel, her pride, and the memory of a house that had tested her, but could not break her. Whitmore Manor receded behind her, a monument to silence, while Isabella stepped toward a future she would forge alone. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Isabella Clark reached the Clark farm, its weathered fence and sagging roof a humble contrast to the grandeur of Whitmore Manor. The fields, small and patched with clover, stretched toward a grove of willows, their branches swaying in the morning breeze. Isabella's boots sank into the familiar earth, her canvas satchel heavy on her shoulder, her heart heavier still. The pain of Grayson Whitmore's words, "She's a maid, nothing more," lingered like a bruise, yet she walked with her head high, her pride a beacon that no dismissal could dim. This was her home, her refuge, where she had fought for her mother's life and her own dignity. Inside the modest cottage, the air smelled of herbs and bread, a warmth that wrapped around Isabella like an embrace. Sarah, her childhood friend, was there, stirring a pot over the hearth, her auburn curls tied back, her eyes brightening at the sight of Isabella. "You're back!" Sarah exclaimed, then paused, noting the satchel and the shadow in Isabella's gaze. "What happened, Bella? The manor? Did he—" Her voice trailed off, concern softening her tone. Isabella set her satchel down, her fingers brushing the locket at her throat, her mother's keepsake. "He called me nothing," she said, her voice steady but laced with a quiet sorrow. "Just a maid, Sarah. I thought," she faltered, the memory of Grayson's eyes, storm gray, fleetingly tender, cutting deeper than his words. "I thought he saw me, truly saw me, but I was wrong." Sarah pulled her to a chair, her hands firm. "You're not nothing," she said fiercely. "You're Isabella Clark, who kept her mama alive through war and worse. If he can't see that, he's the one who's lost." She poured tea, the steam rising like a prayer, and leaned closer. "But you care for him, don't you? I saw it at the festival, your eyes when he spoke for you." Isabella's cheeks warmed, her gaze dropping to the cup in her hands. "I did," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I won't stay where I'm not valued. I've fought too hard for that." Yet even as she spoke, a part of her lingered on the manor, on the wildflowers she'd placed, the piano she'd dared to touch, the man whose silence hid a heart she had almost reached. Sarah squeezed her hand. "If he comes for you, give him a chance, but only if he deserves it." Isabella nodded, her resolve firm but her heart uncertain. Outside, the willows whispered, their leaves a soft promise of spring to come. She rose, her hands already seeking work, her spirit unbroken. The farm was her beginning, not her end, and though Grayson's words had wounded her, they could not steal the hope that burned within. The morning sun crept into Whitmore Manor, its light pale and hesitant, as if reluctant to disturb the silence that had grown heavier in Isabella Clark's absence. Grayson Whitmore descended to the kitchen, drawn by an instinct he could not name, his boots echoing in the empty halls. The house felt hollow, its rooms stripped of the faint warmth that had begun to linger, lavender scent, folded linens, the echo of a hummed melody. He had sensed her departure before he knew it, the manor's pulse faltering without her quiet presence. On the kitchen table, a key gleamed beside a folded note, its simplicity a stark contrast to the chaos it unleashed within him. Grayson's hand trembled as he took the paper, unfolding it to reveal Isabella's careful script. "I was not made for silence, Mr. Whitmore. I hope someday you won't be either." The words struck like a bell, clear and resonant, piercing the walls he had built around his heart. He read them again, then again, each syllable a mirror to his failures, his cold words to Tate, his accusations, his refusal to see the woman who had challenged his solitude. He sank onto a chair, the note clutched in his hand, his storm-gray eyes distant. The manor, once his fortress, now felt like a tomb, its silence a punishment for the truth he had denied. Isabella was gone, and with her, the light she had brought. Wildflowers, laughter, a courage that had stirred his buried heart. For the first time since Charlotte's death, Grayson felt the weight of loss, not as a memory, but as a wound raw and present. He murmured her words aloud, "I was not made for silence," and the sound broke something within him, a resolve to reclaim what he had let slip away. The dawn broke over Whitmore Manor with a clarity that seemed to mock the turmoil within Grayson Whitmore's heart. The note from Isabella Clark, its words a quiet indictment of his silence, lay crumpled in his hand as he stormed down the grand staircase. His coat hastily donned, his storm-gray eyes alight with a fire long dormant. The manor, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage, its silence a testament to the life he had let slip away. He could not, would not, let her go, not without facing the truth he had buried beneath pride and grief. Isabella had seen him, truly seen him, and he had cast her aside. No more. Miss Adeline stood at the foot of the stairs, her arms crossed, her spectacles glinting with a knowing that bordered on reproach. "Where are you off to in such a state, sir?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unkind, as if she had foreseen this moment. "The Clark farm," Grayson said, his voice tight, urgent. "Where is it?" He paused, his breath uneven, the weight of his purpose pressing against him. Miss Adeline's lips twitched, a rare hint of approval softening her stern features. "North Road, past the Willow Grove," she said, "You'd best hurry, sir. She's not one to linger." With a nod, she stepped aside, muttering, "About time," as Grayson strode past, his resolve aflame that no wind could extinguish. He mounted his chestnut stallion, the beast sensing his urgency, and rode hard through the fields, the cotton blooms a blur of white against the green. The road was long, winding past homes scarred by war, past fields that had once belonged to friends, now gone. Yet Grayson's mind was not on the past but on her. Isabella, with her wildflowers and fearless words, her laughter that had pierced his defenses. He saw her in the drawing room, her hands steady against the storm, her eyes meeting his with a courage that shamed his own. He saw her at the festival, her smile a light he had no right to claim, and he saw her in the hall, her defiance a mirror to the heart he had locked away. The memory of Charlotte stirred, her laughter a faint echo, but it no longer bound him. Isabella was not Charlotte. She was not a ghost to be mourned, but a woman who had challenged him to live. The willows loomed ahead, their branches whispering in the breeze, and Grayson's heart raced, not with fear, but with a clarity he had never known. He had failed once with Charlotte, but he would not fail again. The Clark farm lay just beyond, its humble roof a beacon of hope he had almost lost. He urged the horse onward, the dust rising in his wake, determined to reclaim the one who had undone his silence with her light. The Clark farm lay nestled at the edge of a willow grove, its modest fields bathed in the tender light of morning. Grayson Whitmore dismounted his stallion, his breath uneven, his coat damp with the sweat of a ride fueled by desperation. The cottage stood before him, its roof weathered but proud, a testament to the resilience of those who called it home. Beyond, in a small garden patched with seedlings, he saw her, Isabella Clark, her sleeves rolled, her hands streaked with earth, her braid glinting like a dark river under the sun. She was no maid here, but a woman rooted in her own strength, and the sight of her stole the air from his lungs. Grayson approached, his boots sinking into the soft earth, his heart a drumbeat of fear and hope. Isabella looked up, her eyes widening with surprise, then narrowing with the guarded pride that had first undone him. She rose, brushing her hands, her silence a wall he knew he must breach. He stopped a few paces away, his tall frame taut, his storm-gray eyes searching hers for a sign of forgiveness he scarcely dared to hope for. "Isabella," he began, his voice low, unsteady, stripped of the cold authority that had once defined him. "I've been silent too long, about everything. I was taught that feeling made you weak, that letting someone in meant losing control." He swallowed, his hands clenching at his sides. "But you never asked for anything. You gave light, laughter, decency, and I was too blind to see it, too proud to hold it." Isabella's expression softened, but her gaze remained steady, a challenge he could not evade. "You called me nothing, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice quiet but firm, the wound of his words still raw. "I am not a thing to be dismissed." Grayson stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are everything," he said, the words raw, unguarded. "I was wrong, about you, about myself. I don't want you back as a maid, Isabella. I want you beside me, in that house, in my life, if you'll have me." His voice broke, a plea born of a heart laid bare. For a moment, silence held them. The willows whispering in the breeze, the earth warm beneath their feet. Then Isabella stepped forward, her hand, still dusted with soil, reaching to rest over his heart. Her touch was light, but it anchored him, a promise of something new. "Then speak more often, Grayson Whitmore," she said, her voice soft, her eyes alight with a warmth that banished his shadows. "Let your house be filled with something other than silence." He covered her hand with his breath steadying, and for the first time in years, a smile broke across his face. Small, real, and full of a love he had never dared to claim. Beneath the willows they stood, their hands entwined, the world fading to the rhythm of their shared pulse. The storm that had once divided them was gone, replaced by a quiet that was not empty but whole. Spring unfurled across Baldwin County in gentle waves, the cotton fields blooming white against the verdant green, a quiet promise of renewal. Beneath the willow grove, where the branches swayed like a lover's whisper, Grayson Whitmore stood in a pressed coat, his storm-gray eyes softened by a warmth that had once been foreign to him. Before him, Isabella Clark approached through the grass, her hair pinned loosely, her dress catching the breeze, her presence a melody that stilled the world. The willows framed them, their leaves a canopy of green, and the air was sweet with the scent of earth and hope. Grayson held a small velvet box, its weight a bridge between past and future. He did not kneel, such gestures were not his way, but his gaze held her with a reverence that spoke louder than ceremony. "You've changed everything, Isabella," he said, his voice low, steady, each word a vow carved from the heart he had once locked away. "You brought light where I saw only shadow, courage where I knew only fear. Without asking for anything, you gave me everything." He opened the box, revealing a ring, simple, elegant, a sky-colored stone set in an old band. "This was my mother's," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "It never felt right for anyone. Until now." His voice trembled, not with doubt, but with the weight of a truth he had fought to claim. Isabella's breath caught, her eyes glinting with a joy that made the sun seem dim. She stepped closer, her hand reaching for his, her touch a spark that warmed the morning. "Then put it on me, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice gentle, teasing, yet rich with love, "before you change your mind." A smile curved her lips, and Grayson's own smile answered, a rare gift that lit his face with a youth he had forgotten. He slid the ring onto her finger, its fit as sure as their bond, and for a moment neither moved, the world narrowing to the space between them. Then, with the careful reverence of a man who had learned the fragility of love, Grayson leaned forward and kissed her, not with hesitation, but with a truth that bound them. The willows sighed, their branches brushing the earth, and beneath their shade, Grayson and Isabella stood, wrapped in a silence that was no longer cold, but full, alive with the promise of a life they would build together. The cotton baron was gone, replaced by a man who loved, and beside him, a woman who had taught him to speak without words. Whitmore Manor stood as it always had, its white columns proud against the Georgia sky, yet spring had wrought a transformation as profound as the love that now dwelled within. The cotton fields bloomed in radiant waves, their white petals a mirror to the hope that had taken root. Gone was the silence that had once ruled the halls, replaced by a warmth that pulsed like a heartbeat. The grand piano, long shrouded, now sang under Isabella's fingers, its notes drifting through open windows, mingling with the laughter that echoed from the kitchen. Whitmore Manor was no longer a tomb, but a home. Grayson Whitmore, once a baron of cold command, moved through the rooms with a lightness that belied his years. His storm-gray eyes, once guarded, now softened with a love that had reshaped him. He paused in the parlor, watching Isabella arrange wildflowers in a vase, her smile a melody that needed no words. She was no maid now, but his equal, his heart, her presence a fire that warmed the coldest corners of his world. The ghosts of Charlotte, of war, of solitude, lingered still, but they no longer bound him. Isabella had set him free. In the evenings they walked the fields together, her hand in his, the cotton blooms soft beneath their steps. The manor's hearth burned bright, its rooms filled with the voices of friends, Sarah, even Miss Adeline, whose stern facade had softened. Grayson spoke more now, his words no longer clipped but full, a testament to the life he had chosen. Whitmore Manor, like the man who loved it, had learned to sing, its silence broken by the music of two souls who had found each other beneath the willows.